And I can probably get started just with the introduction right now while more people sign in. So I'm really happy to invite everybody to welcome everybody to the 11th Anthropocene to Ecozoic webinar. And to give a brief explanation for those of you not familiar with the program, so University of Vermont, McGill, and York initiated some years back an Economics to the Anthropocene program, recognizing that we needed a new economic system to cope with the overwhelming impact humans have on the planet. And we refunded the project is Leadership for the Ecozoic, where the Ecozoic is a system of mutual flourishing between humans and the rest of nature. You might think a lot of economists right now are focused on ecosystem services, the benefits nature provides to humans. This would complement that with the benefits humans provide to nature, which is increasingly important. So the merger of these two programs is through these, the Anthropocene to Ecozoic, and one part of that is these webinars. This is the 11th webinar. Today, we're going to be focusing on ecological restoration. So it'll be a slightly different format than usual. Usually we have a combination of professors and PhD students. Our PhD student this time is from Australia, so the time zone is definitely a little off. So what she'll be doing is we'll be viewing a video. So let me see how I can mute everybody here. We'll be viewing a video of her work, and then following which we will have presentations by two leading restoration ecologists, which will be James Aronson and James Blignot. But James Blignot will be presenting, and then James Aronson will join him for questions. So to begin with, I'll introduce our absent scholar, which is Emille Boulot. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, unfortunately. She is part of the Economics to the Anthropocene cohort, I believe, but definitely Anthropocene to Ecozoic program. She's pursuing her PhD in the Department of Natural Resource Sciences at McGill. She already has a master's in environmental governance with a focus on polar climate and oceans, and is admitted to the Supreme Court of Tasmania as an Australian lawyer. So she has a background in legal and regulatory studies and research, and is currently researching adaptive governance in the context of ecological restoration. I'll hold off on introducing James A and James B until after this first video, which Ursula and Dina will be posting for us momentarily.
Okay. So hi everyone, my name's Emille. I'm a PhD candidate with the L4E project, and because of COVID, I am living and undertaking field work in Australia. And as it's 2 AM right now, I won't be joining you for this presentation, but do feel free to email me with any questions or comments. So today I'm going to be talking about restoring land and restoring law. I have a disciplinary background in environmental chemistry, and I'm also a lawyer and have been researching questions of law and restoration since my master's. I'm very interested in the interface between law, science, and society, and I'm passionate about improving some of the very fundamental limitations of environmental law. And the reason I look at ecological restoration as a case study to investigate these questions of law is because I believe it is a process that can question fundamental norms of traditional environmental governance, and in its broader sense and best practice has the potential to restore not only land, but also law and the ways in which we relate to the world. So my presentation today is from a chapter that I contributed to the edited collection From Environmental to Ecological Law. And this was organized by members of A2E, as well as the Ecological Law and Governance Association. My presentation today also draws upon my research that I'm undertaking for my PhD. So ecological restoration is the process of assisting the recovery of damaged ecosystems to restore ecological structure, complexity, and integrity so that the system is self-supporting and resilient and displays a level of historical continuity and fidelity. I refer to ecological restoration as a practice that also incorporates restoration ecology, so the science of ecological restoration, as well as multiple social, cultural, political, economic, and ethical concerns, as well as the perspectives and knowledges of local and Indigenous people. So ecological restoration is a process that involves high levels of uncertainty, as well as social and ecological trade-offs, long-term management, and an acceptance of continual change. So, how does ecological restoration challenge environmental law? First, let's consider at a very general level the operation of liberal Western environmental law. So environmental law and governance informs intergenerational landscapes and responses to environmental damage. But despite the development of local, national, and international environmental law and regulation, as well as increasingly sophisticated environmental impact assessments and environmental agencies, ecological degradation has not reduced, nor has the rate decreased. In fact, if anything, the rate of ecological degradation has increased. And this, I argue, is due to the structural ways in which environmental law operates. First, it is predominantly concerned with pollution management, natural resource extraction, and conservation. As a governing institution, environmental law predominantly takes an upfront command and control approach to natural resource management, seeking to ensure a maximum sustained yield from environmental systems, whether that is the extraction of water, mineral resources, or forestry. It also seeks to ensure certainty for private property and corporate rights and other more powerful areas of law. And environmental law assumes linearity between problem and solution, therefore being a very reductionist system. In addition, environmental law also considers nature and human as being separate. Environmental law takes the human as its subject and nature as its object, assuming a divide between nature and culture. And this means that nature is abstracted and reified from the social context. Nature thus becomes passive or non-agentic, being terra nullius, or a land belonging to no one, or a resource empty of meaning and purpose, and therefore available for annexation and extraction. So ecological restoration as a practice raises significant questions for environmental institutions, law, and policy, as it necessarily rejects references to the colonial concepts of wilderness that has plagued environmental management and policy for decades. The mythical, pristine, and untouched wilderness as encountered in pre-European settlement in colonized countries such as Americas and Australia were ecosystems shaped by indigenous land management practices such as fire. This challenges the idea that nature is out there somewhere, or that nature is separate to us, as I was just mentioning before. Furthermore, the practice of ecological restoration often requires its practitioners to consider their role in the restored ecosystem and the role of other humans in the restored ecosystem, and thus breaks that ontological framing of the environment as being separate and being a resource. Ecological restoration also challenges what has been called epistemic monolingualism in environmental law. So this is the idea that there is a single epistemology, which assumes in environmental law that the natural can be manipulated, controlled, and managed in a way that ensures ongoing resource extraction. The process of ecological restoration therefore requires acknowledgement that restoring landscapes is a process very much informed by ecological complexity and uncertainty as to future ecological trajectories. And this process requires complex systems thinking, which necessarily requires its practitioners to acknowledge many different knowledge inputs and ways of knowing. Furthermore, from a temporal perspective, restoration initiatives that are designed to help restore native ecosystems can take decades, centuries, or even millennia. This challenges environmental governance, which is often temporally limited and focused more on extraction and pollution management in the short term than on long-term ecological inputs. And spatially, restoration that recognizes that ecosystems are located in larger systems and takes an approach which considers cross-habitat linkages and energy fluxes across the landscape has the potential to disrupt environmental law's limited jurisdiction, not only its jurisdiction over its subject, that being the environment, but also across landscapes where borders and legal systems rarely ever match ecological boundaries and bioregions. So the question then becomes, how do we restore to a more ecological law? So the practice of an ecological restoration can give us a few pointers. First, restoration with broad stakeholder and community involvement and engagement assists in the development of a sense of place. It can ground and attach people to places in which they live with a deep metaphysical or emotional connection. And this can motivate people to care for ecosystems beyond their services that they provide or their aesthetics. Restoration can also instill a sense of stewardship or responsibility with respect to land and property, and restoring relationship to place, and also developing a more relational understanding of property ownership. And from an instrumental and institutional perspective, place-based governance can be supported through processes such as stewardship, bioregional planning, which is planning designed to maintain the integrity of a bioregion, as well as ecosystem management. Second, ecological restoration as a process seeks to assist socio-ecological systems through cyclical changes of increasing ecological complexity, structure and function to increase resilience and adaptability to disturbance and changing dynamics. The national standards for the practice of ecological restoration note that restoration is an adaptive, reflexive, and systemic practice guided by site characteristics and the relationship of the site with socio-ecological systems, including climate, landscape function, and community. So ecological restoration therefore requires long-term conservation management, review processes, and changes in direction in order to correct for unexpected ecosystem responses. Conditions therefore that require flexible and adaptive governance regimes to account for the high levels of uncertainty and imperfect understandings of ecosystem interrelationships and feedbacks. This uncertainty and complexity is equally true across the rest of environmental law, and I argue governance frameworks such as adaptive governance, as discussed, are equally applicable to the rest of environmental law. And finally, complex systems and processes such as ecological restoration are both multidimensional and multidisciplinary, requiring multiple perspectives and epistemic pluralism. So this has the potential to shift environmental governance away from its rational decision-making processes of epistemic monolingualism that reflect a single representation of the system to one where there are multiple representations and understandings, as well as multiple ways of knowing the particular system. So it is evident that socio-ecological problems that characterize the Anthropocene are existential ones. And these derive, I argue, from the characteristics of the relationship between humans and the more than human. And environmental law is no different in the way that it conceives of nature as other. Ecological restoration that attempts not only to restore nature, but also to restore culture and the ways of relating to the world, therefore provide opportunities to envision a legal system that is ecologically grounded. This potential, however, must be advanced and defended against scientific technical practices, which are dominated often by experts and technicians and concerned more with efficiency and uniformity. This results in restoration as a commodity. So examples include mine rehabilitation and reclamation, which is often generally concerned with meeting very low standards and ensuring that the reparation of ecosystem components is limited to things such as stable landforms, soil stability, or water quality. So this process of reducing ecosystems to their components, such as water and soil quality, undermines an appreciation of the overall complexity of these systems and can result in really poor quality restoration, as well as the prioritization of certain restoration goals, such as carbon sequestration over others. This can have unintended consequences for objectives such as biodiversity. It can also disaggregate and continue to commodify the natural world through offsets and ecosystem services. This also means that any environmental restoration law must also be values-led. What do we as stewards of landscape value? How do we want to foster and anticipate our relationship with the more than human world through restoration and law? And how do we want to make decisions that incorporate incommensurable value across the landscape? And so from a legal perspective, we need high-level, evidence-informed, values-led standards to guide and enforce restoration of biodiverse landscapes for the generations of humans and non-humans to come. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, comments, critiques, or suggestions, please email me. My email is there on the screen. Thank you.